Hello family, Joseph Baba Ifa here once again coming at you with a new video, and this video is going to be on the Orisha Obatala. So we've gotten some requests, multiple requests to come out with a video on this Orisha already, and so we're going to go ahead and make sure that happens to be able to keep our viewers satisfied. Before we get into everything, we just want to go ahead and appreciate everybody and thank everybody for watching the channel consistently, and we're really appreciative of all the support we've been getting and all the multiple subscribers that really come and join our page on a daily basis, right? So definitely appreciative of that. So Obatala, right? Lot to cover. Very extensive Orisha with a lot of information behind him, so we're going to go ahead and get right into it, right? Definitely an Orisha that is very popular in both the diaspora as well as, traditional practice, right? His priesthood is very widespread. I mean, when we're talking about Cuba, you're going to meet multiple priests of Obatala, as well as in Nigeria, you're going to see quite a few people who have been initiated in that priesthood. When we're talking about Obatala, he's associated with quite a few different parts of Nigeria, but one of the main points or places where you're going to find a lot of Obatala initiates or people who really pay homage to this Orisha is going to be Ife. And in the city of Ife, which is kind of like, the dawn, the place of the dawn of civilization, at least for us, the Yoruba, you're going to see that he's very predominant and he's very well liked and well viewed. Within Ife, he is seen as the epitome of Orisha, or what every Orisha or every human being should emulate, right? As you go to other parts of Nigeria, you're going to see there's different concepts of that. Like, in certain parts of Nigeria, you're going to see that, other Orishas are emulated a bit more than Obatala, but I mean, pretty much throughout Nigeria, you're going to see him being viewed as the first Orisha, as the Orisha that kind of, birthed everybody else or made life possible for everybody else, right? So, but within Ife, he is viewed as the epitome of Orisha. He's viewed as that prime example of Orisha, right? And, a lot of people will say Odudua, but those are themes we're going to get into in this video, kind of the relationship between them two and how they're viewed, right? So, within Ife, he's seen as a very, very important deity, and his characteristics are to be emulated, right? He's seen as the epitome. So when we're talking about the word Obatala, what does it exactly mean? There's a couple different ways to translate it. I mean, when we're talking about Yoruba or the language, each syllable, each letter could mean a completely different word and meaning. So, when you're talking about the name of something or a word in general, you're going to see a lot of different translations and interpretations of it, right? So just a couple that we were able to identify was, when we're talking about the word Obatala, the most common one that we see or translation that we see is King of the White Cloth, right? And we're talking about how we break that word down. The word Oba means king, and Tala means to be covered in white cloth, right? So it speaks of that. Another way of translating that is the king who arrives dressed in white, right? We're talking about Obatanla, which means, the king presented himself in Allah, or the white cloth, right? So, it kind of falls into that. King of the white cloth, or the king who arrives dressed in white. And when we're talking about Obatala, that is definitely the color that's associated with him, right? He was recognizable because of his impeccable white robes. And he characterized this through his daily dress. Every day he was dressed in white, every day he was purifying. And when we're talking about Obatala, there's a duality when it comes to this, right? Some people would analyze and say, Obatala was the purest Orisha, and when he was at a more mature stage, this was definitely true. But when we were talking about a more youthful Obatala, he wasn't always dressed in white. He had to grow into that maturity to be able to keep himself clean, which is what the white cloth necessarily represents, right? The purification process, becoming more pure, becoming more mature, and having better iwa, or better character, right? So him being viewed as an elder Orisha in this white cloth lets you know that it took work and it took a process for him to be able to arrive at that, because the younger paths of Obatala, the other manifestations, you're going to see combinations of colors, especially with a deity known as, or a path of his known as Ayaguna, where it was white combined with red, with hints of red. Now, a lot of people, look at that and say, well, Ayaguna, the reason he had red on his clothing was because of war. Well, and the blood of his enemies was technically on his clothes. So if we look at the symbolic aspect of that, we're talking about a manifestation of Obatala that wasn't necessarily completely pure. He was somebody who, dedicated himself to war, and not all of them were necessarily justified, right? So his clothes or his purity was stained. As he became older and he retired away from that lifestyle, his clothes became all white, which is ultimately the manifestation that's most popular because it shows that progress from being impure or having gone through certain situations where you weren't wholesome, and then from there really graduating into being able to wear the white cloth with confidence because you knew you were doing the right thing. So it speaks of his transition into being able to wear the white cloth, representing his purity through his maturity and life experience, right? So that's another way of translating it. The word Obatala can also mean the king who dreams, right? Allah also means dreams, right? And it really goes back to the fact that Obatala has a lot to do with the act of sleeping. He has a lot to do with the act of dreaming. The divination process known as dreaming, being able to transport, through sleep from this world to the next. He is an Orisha in various Pataki that was seen as somebody who dreamed and was able, to be able to maybe save his life or make the best decisions based on the messages that were given to him through his dreams, right? It could also be interpreted as the king who divines through dreams, touching on that. And it could also be the king who sends messages through dreams. Based on this correlation, I've noticed within my practice and just meeting various priests of Obatala, being that I'm usually surrounded by them based on my Odu, his children have a natural knack for this, right? They're dreamers. They're people who should pay close attention to their dreams and the messages that come through them, simply because you're going to get messages and you're going to be able to really use that information for whatever purpose, whether it be helping somebody else, helping yourself, divining, all of these things. So as a child of Obatala, you definitely want to pay attention to your dreams. And as an Orisha practitioner, you usually want to pay attention to that anyway, because being that Obatala is the owner of the head and he kind of controls all the different modes of sleep and all of its various stages where dreams come through. It's definitely something you want to pay attention to and try to get into a habit of interpreting and seeing what information you can really get from the dreams, right? So very key here, and he's highly linked towards that, the act of sleeping, dreaming, the relaxation, the calm, the resting of the mind, right? Obatala was somebody who required a lot of this, being that you are the owner of the head or was the owner of the head. It was somebody who had a lot on his mind. So definitely an Orisha that when we're in his presence, when we're interacting with him in any of its forms, whether it be in person, when somebody's in trance or simply in the same room as him, you definitely want to mediate your words. You definitely want to, conduct yourself accordingly and not do anything to kind of perturb this Orisha, because he is somebody that unfortunately has a lot of patience, but also gets perturbed pretty easily depending on the certain actions that may be occurring. So Obatala likes calm, he likes to sleep, and it's usually that state he likes to find himself in, that one of relaxation, because within Ifa, Obatala having, an accelerated mode of being, or someone being aggravated, or maybe even having high blood pressure, that's not the state you want to find this Orisha in, because it can be very destructive, right? As peaceful as he is, he can be that destructive if taken to that level. So patience is key, calmness is key, sleep was key. So whenever you're interacting with this Orisha, make sure we keep that in mind, and that's the way he likes to be interacted with. Very calm, very cool, very slow. Even the drumming process of Obatala, when we're drumming to Obatala or whenever anything like that is occurring, usually there's very few rhythms with Obatala where, the Anya or the Bata speeds up. You usually want to keep it very calm and very melodic and very soothing. And there's very few instances where the beat does change up and get quite quicker. And usually the dancer or the person that's interpreting Obatala at that moment, you're going to see a very big difference in their movements. When the drum is melodic and very soothing, you can see he's moving with a very paused nature. But when it speeds up, you can tell he gets, I don't want to say aggravated, but he gets accelerated. Like he gets affected by it. And usually when you see that, either it's because that is what's happening, or there's another path of Obatala coming down that's a little more energetic, lively, and youthful. So Peace and calm and tranquility is very big with this deity, and it makes perfect sense because that's what he's associated with. You know, when you're talking about Obatala, we're talking about all of those concepts, right? Whether it be peace, calm, tranquility, and this is the state he likes to find himself in. So another name for Obatala that's very popular, and some would even say is his original name, is Orisha. And when we translate it, it means the great Orisha, all right? Orisha Nla, right? Orisha is Orisha, and La can mean great. It can also mean large, big, grand, or great once again, right? So Orisha Nla could also mean Orisha is large, Orisha is big, Orisha is grand or great. And this is really referring to him as the head of Orisha, the first Orisha, the great Orisha, the large Orisha, the Orisha that covers everyone else, right? And if we kind of analyze Obatala being represented by the white cloth covered all of the Orishas, right? So it really speaks of him being above everybody and covering everybody. And that's why he's seen as grand or great or big, because literally if we're looking at him in that manifestation, the white cloth covers us all. Whether it be when we're initiated in Orisha and we have to wear white through that year, whether it be the clouds in the sky, Obatala is seen as someone that is above. Or even within, you know, the Orisha altar, if you guys look behind me, Obatala is above everybody. One of the various Obatalas that we have in the house, being that there's 4 Orisha that live here, right? So that's another way of translating his name. So, and you're going to see Orisha Nla, you're going to see variations of it like Ochanla, and in one of our other videos on Joseph Baba Ifa, we really touch on what that word means as well and what it represents within the Santeria Lukumi community, because Orisha Nla or Ochanla and Obatala are seen as 2 different manifestations of the same deity. As where in Nigeria, Ochanla or Orisha Nla is Obatala's original name, right? When he first presented himself on earth, right? And Obatala, that name really comes from his fulfillment of his destiny when he became king, right? And was able to fulfill those roles. So that's a couple different, you know, interpretations of his name. So if you hear them used interchangeably, now you know that they're all referring to the same thing in various forms, right? So you know what you're really hearing, right? Obatala, when we're talking about him, he goes all the way back to the beginning, right? And this was found in the Odu of Eyobe, right? When we're talking about Ejiobe, we're talking about the Big Bang, we're talking about the creation theory, the creation myth within Yoruba culture as well as within science, right? It's the beginning, and Obatala was there right in the beginning, right? One of the things that occurred is that Obatala, at this point, was an Irumole. He was a light energy in heaven. And after the creation, basically the Irumole and everybody else kind of cohabited heaven with Olodumare, right? But Olodumare, the reason he had struck the deal with Eshu, or kind of interacted with Eshu to be able to cause the Big Bang and to be able to expand the light, the whole goal of this was to be able to basically create the human race, right? Being that Olodumare wanted to see humankind and, you know, wanted his energies, his pure energies to receive homage, and also to be able to interact with people and feel the joy of it, what it was to have children, right? Human children. So what ended up happening is that, you know, the first Orisha, or Obatala, or at least the Irumole in this aspect, you know, was called upon to be able to carry out this act, right? So Olodumare basically told him, I'm going to give you a couple different materials, and you have this mission to basically populate the human race, right? And Earth. So what ended up happening is obviously Obatala accepted. He's an Orisha generally known as always accepting Olodumare's missions. He's also the personal messenger of Olodumare, and usually that's seen in his aspect of Osagrinyan, right? Who may very well be the Obatala that we're talking about, being that he is viewed as the oldest Obatala and the oldest manifestation of Obatala, as well as being the father of the other Orishas. So usually that's associated with being the oldest Obatala, right? And what ended up happening is Olodumare gave him a couple different materials, and some of the materials were one, a hen. If I recall, the hen had 5 toes, right, or 5 feet, or whatever you want to really refer it to, you know, toes, I guess. He also gave him some sand or some dirt. He also gave him a chameleon, to accompany him down, and there was also a cat involved, and he also gave him a chain to be able to go down with. So within certain aspects of the mythology, it was seen that Obatala came down from a large palm tree, but for story's sake, we're going to say he extended the chain right from heaven, right? And the palm tree, the reason it's viewed as that is because it's symbolic for the cradle of life, and just where the king come from, and it's very symbolic as being there, or the beginning, right, where things are birthed from, right? Yes, Heather, it's a beautiful story. It gets even better now. So what ended up happening is Obatala let the chain down, and he began to descend upon the abyss that was Earth, because at this point, Earth was basically a watery, abyss, right? There was no land. It was all water, and the deity that kind of dominated Earth at that point was Olokun, right? Being that Olokun means owner of the ocean, she was present at the beginning. So what ended up happening is she was basically alone and in complete dominance of the Earth at that point. So what ended up happening is Obatala began descending, and once he got there, and he got to the very end of the chain, he let go some of the sand. And when he let go of the sand, it kind of stayed floating on the water, right? In this dark abyss. So what ended up happening is to make sure that it was stable and it actually was safe to be able to step on, he let go of the chameleon on top of it. And what ended up happening is the chameleon stood on top of it, being that it's not a very heavy animal. And what it ended up doing was moving its feet very slowly to see if, and very cautiously to see if the land was stable enough to be able for Obatala to walk on. And the chameleon and Obatala are associated even till this day. And this also explains why the chameleon walks the way it does. This is actually in Ayobe. The reason the chameleon walks with caution is because the first time it actually landed on Earth or stood on Earth, it was a very uncertain situation, right? He's like, Obatala just let me down on the dirt. I don't know if I'm going to survive this or not, so let me tread lightly to make sure everything is, copacetic, so Obatala can come down, and God forbid he doesn't drown either. So that's basically what happened there. So once the chameleon took a couple steps, and Obatala was able to recognize that it was safe for him to be able to walk on as well, Obatala descended upon the earth as well, or he let go of the chain and ultimately brought the chain down with him. So at this point, he's standing on earth with the chameleon, and as he's doing this, he realized it was safe to do so. He let go of the hen, and once he let go of the hen with its hectic nature, now having its feet on the ground, started basically scratching the earth and spreading it throughout the world, right? It had this magic property that wherever the earth touched, it basically became solid ground. So even at this point, Olodumare recognized that, and Obatala recognized that they needed more water than land. So they basically put a limit on themselves. And even to this day, we recognize that the earth is covered in 70% water, right? The number 7 is very key there. And 30% is land. So this was intentional. This was not Obatala or Olodumare trying to overextend themselves on Olokun, because they realized that they needed Olokun in her domain to be able to basically continue life. So the hen basically was able to do that up until where she was able to or allowed to. So at that point, Obatala, now having land basically made, was alone, right? And the cat that was sent down with him would basically be his companion. And this is why Obatala is heavily associated with the cat, because it was basically his first friend and only companion for a long time, right? So at that point, that's how life was in the very beginning, right? There's other versions within Ayobe that speaks of the 7 sons of Oduduwa that came down, Oramiyang, all of these different characters. But being that this is an Obatala video, we're just focusing on his version right now, because there are multiple versions of this myth. So little by little, the other Irumole, ultimately converting themselves into Orisha, started coming down from heaven, right? So, and they started populating and procreating, etc. This is also another reason why Obatala is seen as an androgynous Orisha to a certain degree because he has male manifestations and female manifestations. So there's versions where Obatala's wife, in some versions it's Ochanla, in other versions it's Yemu, came down with him to be able to procreate and ultimately create the different Orishas, whether it be Ogun, Shango, Elegua is also seen as a son of Obatala, or even Odumila, being one of his youngest sons, if not the youngest. So, what ended up happening though was there's other versions where even before all this occurred, Obatala started confectioning human beings out of the sand or the dirt that he had, and ultimately it turning into clay, and he started molding people. So this next aspect of the Pataki really, explains why Obatala is seen as not being able to drink, or is seen as somebody who really doesn't accept alcohol well. So what ended up happening is Obatala, once he started, confectioning and creating these human molds or figures, became very tired and ultimately very thirsty. And this is where kind of the palm tree concept comes in as well, because what he ended up doing was making something known as emu, which is basically palm wine, right? Or a drink that's very refreshing, but does have an intoxicating quality to it. So Obatala, having worked, so heavily to be able to make the deadline for when Olodumare wanted to have the human race up and running, took a quick break because he had overworked himself and became very hot. And this also explains why Obatala is not particularly a fan of the sun, because he gets overheated. He doesn't like direct sunlight, and that's why a lot of his ceremonies are done at night. And a big reason of that is because of what the sun did to him, or it caused him such a debilitating state to where he actually did have to drink palm wine to be able to refresh himself. So what happened was he became so overexerted that he overdrank, right? And what ended up happening was he became inebriated, right? He became drunk. And once he had got done drinking, he basically continued his job of creating the human beings or molding them, right? But the problem was under the influence of alcohol, he basically made some mistakes. And, some of these mistakes, unfortunately, were, Down syndrome, any of the various congenital issues that anybody could have, whether it be missing an ear, missing an eye. Some of the people, unfortunately, weren't, full, as we'd like to say, right? So what ended up happening was the deadline came, and Olodumare basically went to Obatala and said, are we ready to go? And Obatala said, yeah, we're ready to go. Everything's finished. Obatala, trying to keep impressions up to Olodumare, said yes, right? And him being inebriated, some people say he was so inebriated he didn't realize the mistakes he had made before giving the green light. Other people were like, he knew, but he didn't really want to tell anybody because he didn't want to go through that embarrassment. And Olodumare blew the breath of life, or Emi, as it's known, into these, figures, and ultimately birthed them. But Olodumare quickly realized that, not everything was the way it was supposed to be. He noticed that some people, unfortunately, had certain conditions that weren't, conducive to what would be a productive life. So he looked at Obatala and he looked at what had occurred, and he punished him. Or even some say that Obatala punished himself, where he said, from this day forward I'll never drink this again because of what it made me do. It made me tarnish myself. It put a mark on my reputation, right? And Olodumare, unfortunately, it's not that he lost trust in Obatala from that point, but he always double checked and kind of checked in on Obatala to make sure he was doing the right thing. There's another version of the story where back to where Obatala had started drinking, someone said he fell asleep, inebriated, right? And now these are where the various versions come in, because there's some versions where Olodumare noticed that Obatala hadn't called him or reached out to him to, blow life or breathe life into the different human beings that were there. And in some versions, it said that he sent Ogun. And the reason this is also a viable interpretation as well is because if we look at the word okunring or obingring, it actually means oko earring, which means oko is the male reproductive organ, and earring means iron, right? And obo earring is the female reproductive organ, and earring is iron. So it says that, man and woman were confectioned out of iron, or their specific physiology was. So some people say that, once Olodumare realized that Obatala had become inebriated and couldn't finish his role, he sent Ogun to finish it, right? Due to his, wisdom and knowledge of being a blacksmith and metallurgy, right? There's other versions as well where he sent Odudua, right? And, the same basic story where Odudua was the one who came and fulfilled Obatala's roles because Obatala was inebriated, and Odudua was a very serious, correct guy. And he saw the opportunity to be able to usurp Obatala's position as being the king of Ife and the father of the human race, right? And being seen as the Messiah, right? Where this is where the version of within Ife, where some people are more partial to Odudua and emulating Odudua as the epitome of Orisha rather than Obatala, where there's other people who kind of have the view, Obatala is the epitome because he was the first, regardless of whatever happened. Within Ifa, once again, this really comes back to my ideology that, no one's right and no one's wrong. There's so many different versions, and we're talking about things that are from time immemorial where, we really just don't know. And there's really arguments for all of them. It's just really rich literature and mythology that we ultimately have to interpret for ourselves. So it speaks of that. When we're talking about, not to digress too much, but when we're talking about the taboo of Obatala with the emu, which is the palm wine, if you've interacted with it, and you could probably find it at any of your, African markets, Nigerian food places, any of these things, it's very different from alcohol, like rum or gin or anything like this. It's almost juice-like. So a lot of people say, no, Obatala can't drink rum or any type of alcohol. It's not necessarily true, because I've seen traditional priests put oti or any type of alcohol, usually white, on Obatala. And I've also seen Lukumi practitioners do the same thing, and nothing negative has happened. So it really is up to interpretation, but one thing that is definitely taboo for Obatala is the emu, and I haven't seen anybody put this on Obatala in my years of practice and study. So just so people kind of understand the difference, right? And if we look at the word emu, it means with respect I drink. E, which is like a Yoruba gesture for respect, and mu, which obviously means drink or to suck, right? So, it says with respect or with caution, drink this. And this also reflects back on Obatala's interaction with it in that situation, right? So it speaks of that. So this is what really leads into the next aspect of what the creation story was, right? Once Olokun saw that Obatala had created the human race and they had taken away part of her kingdom and all of these different things, she wasn't very happy about it, right? Where she basically started a vendetta against Obatala, the human race, the Orishas, as well as Olodumare. So Olodumare basically explained to Obatala, you have to handle this, because if not, she's going to destroy everything. Because she started sending tsunamis and starting war with the human race, and specifically Obatala, because she saw him as her greatest obstacle to still being, ruler of the earth, right? Being that she had basically overworked herself into believing that everything was hers and she couldn't share it with anybody. So when we go back to the beginning of the creation myth, Obatala basically came with a chain, right? And that same chain, was waiting in the background. And what he ended up doing was they lured Olokun to the ocean shore by basically taunting her. And what they ended up doing was when they caught her, they basically threw the chain around her. And what the chain did is ultimately sunk her to the bottom of the ocean, right? And where till this day she resides. So a couple different interpretations of this. Unfortunately, the chain had to be used for that, but at the same time, it also is a metaphor for gravity, right? And Ayobe is where gravity was born, or the act of things not floating all over the place. And the chain is basically what that was. It was gravity, which is till this day keeps Olokun at the bottom of the ocean. So needless to say, after all this happened, Olokun was not happy, but she kind of had to deal with it because they had her chained to the floor with gravity. And this basically started the epic between Olokun and Obatala not necessarily interacting well with each other. They're seen as the forefathers or the parents of the world, technically, because they were kind of the first ones there, but they don't necessarily get along. And there's various pataki where you're going to see this, as well as other reasons why the ocean constantly attacks Earth, right? Because Olokun is constantly trying to, thank you, Heather, Olokun is constantly trying to take back its kingdom, or at least get that last punch in, based on what happened, prehistorically. Even though she didn't want to accept destiny and Olodumari's wishes, till this day she still has to deal with that. So there's that aspect. And when we're talking about the relationship between Olokun and Obatala, it's very deep as well. There's various pataki where these Orishas interacted, and it wasn't always necessarily positive. There's an Odu known as Irosun Ogunda or Iroso Toda, where Obatala and Olokun went to war, right? And what basically happened is it really correlates back to the creation myth, because in this Odu, there's a pataki where Obatala was even confectioning the body of Olokun. But the problem is some versions say Obatala got drunk, some versions say Obatala got tired, and right when he was about to define Olokun from a gender standpoint, he got tired and took a break. And Olokun was not happy about this. She was like, man, this is a really disrespectful guy. I'm about to be complete. I'm about to assume my role here on Earth. And this guy stops at the most important part when it comes to my identity, which was, is gender parts, right? And Olokun, basically, after waiting for a while, went up to Obatala and said, yo, I need you to finish me, right? I need you to define me so I can do what I have to do. And Obatala said, I'll do that when I'm ready. I'm tired right now. And Olokun said, I'm not waiting for you. These are things I shouldn't have to wait for. And you can see that both of them kind of had reasons to, feel that they were correct. I mean, Obatala had just created everybody, and he was tired, and Olokun was like, I need this so I can do my job. And basically, Olokun persisted so much that Obatala said, don't bother me no more. I'm going to do it when I'm ready. And when basically he said that, Olokun kind of responded, well, let's go to war then. And Obatala looked at, her, because Olokun is, within Nigeria, he's seen more of a masculine Orisha. Within Cuba, he's seen as a little more feminine. I say her because it's just what I'm used to saying. It's not that I have, the belief that it is woman or man, and this pataki really explains that. Olokun responded and was like, let's go to war. And Obatala kind of looked at her and was like, if you want to go to war, we can go to war, but you can't compete with me. It's basically the whole world against you, because I command all the armies. Where Obatala does have a very warlike nature, and it kind of reverts back to his path or manifestation of Ayaguna. And Olokun didn't care. She's like, I'll go to war, I'll see you in 3 days. And Obatala said, okay, I'll see you in 3 days right here. The border between the ocean and the earth, where usually this epic kind of transpires. So Olokun, after realizing what she had done, said, man, I'm really in deep stuff here, because, Obatala's right. He has the whole army. It's just me. I can only do so much with waves. All of the creatures in the ocean, even if they weren't, created at this point, really weren't going to be able to fight on land anyway. So she went for divination with Ifa, where this Odu was revealed. And, basically the story goes is that, Olokun had to provide a sacrifice to Shango. And, at that point, Shango would kind of reveal, which way he was going to be able to help her. So when Olokun did what she was instructed to do by Ifa, Shango said, I heard you're going to war with Obatala. And Olokun said, yeah, I need help. And Shango said, I'm going to give you my 2 best weapons, which are my dragons, right? It's an Odu that speaks of the mythological creature of the dragon, right? So Olokun said, what do I do with them? He said, ride into battle on them, and basically, allow them to do what they need to do. They'll be under your control. But, Shango told her, he said, be very careful with how you utilize these things, because they can cause a lot of destruction. So, know when you've won and know when to stop, because you can destroy the whole earth like this, And Olokun said, yeah, sure, I'll have control. So the day of the battle, Obatala was there with his army, and they had thought that Olokun had basically forfeited and was gonna live in shame. And Olokun presented herself on top of the dragons ablaze, right? They came in basically blowing everybody up and setting everybody on fire and killing everybody, to the point where, Olokun kind of lost control and killed everybody except Obatala, because she still needed something from Obatala. So when she parked the dragons and she was there on the shore and her and Obatala were face to face, Olokun looked at him and said, "I won." And Obatala said, "Yeah, you won the battle, but you lost the war." And Olokun said, "What do you mean?" Obatala said, just because you've done this doesn't mean I'm going to give you what you want. If anything, now I'm never going to give it to you because you had no patience or good character. So therefore, I'm going to leave you in the state you are so you can always have a reminder of how important patience and good character is. And Olokun said, "You can't do that." And Obatala said, "Well, I don't have to do anything you tell me to because I'm older than you. And Olodumare listens to me first rather than you. And you can't kill me because, I'm an Irumole. You can't touch me like that. So enjoy life at the bottom of the ocean, not knowing who you are." And basically that's how that happened and transpired. And it's a really, it's a pataki that has a lot of lessons in it. Sad outcome for Olokun, but Obatala had superiority, and until this day, this Odu says that we really don't know what gender Olokun has, and you could speak to 100 different priests, and everybody's going to have a different opinion on it. That's why it's seen as androgynous and hermaphroditic. So, that relationship was never really great, right? So they always had issues, and you're going to see various interactions between Obatala and Olokun, and you're going to see various versions of it. But overall, it's not a great relationship necessarily, because Obatala was the one who chained Olokun to the bottom of the ocean floor, and then from another aspect, he also basically left her hermaphroditic, due to her disrespecting him. So we kind of see a very different nature than what we're used to seeing from Obatala in these stories. Obatala was very cold here. He was very stern. This is why Obatala is also associated with the judicial system and being the judge, because he is blind to the fact of what feels right and what feels wrong and what is right and what is wrong. Obatala simply does what Olodumare vested within him, which is basically the judgment of situations, to basically mediate them and see how people should be punished or, disciplined or, rewarded. And that's kind of what happened with Olokun. He didn't want to chain Olokun, but Olokun did the wrong thing, and he had to carry out Olodumare's wishes and discipline, right? And also, within the story of Irosotoda, it was the same thing. Olokun disrespected him. Olokun, wasn't patient. Olokun didn't have good character, and Olokun didn't follow basically status quo to allow him to be able to help her do what he needed to do for her. And ultimately, he had to punish her, being that he was the elder, and she basically disrespected him by going to war with him and killing everybody. And there's even versions of this Odu where Obatala had to start over again, where within Ifa, you're going to see that this present manifestation that Earth is in, this isn't the first time the human race has been here. It's been multiple times, because you're going to see various pataki where, the whole human race gets annihilated, whether it be Rosotoda or Sarete, there's Eyobe, Oyakumeji. There's various times when the human race was basically wiped out, and Olodumare was like, start over again. Even in Ofunchewe, it speaks of this. So it's a constant theme, and Obatala is usually there because he is the father of the human race in some versions. So, that's basically how Obatala and Olokun's relationship is. And throughout Ifa, we're going to realize that Obatala didn't necessarily get along with everybody. So, we're going to see that theme there. So, before we get into some more relationships of Obatala with different Orishas, we're going to talk about a couple of his ewos, which are his taboos, right? Obatala is seen as a very clean Orisha, a very wholesome Orisha, a very pure Orisha, so he doesn't necessarily interact with everything. He has some very strict taboos based on his previous life, obviously with the creation myth, and ultimately choosing sobriety from that point forward, at least to that specific liquid. And he pretty much is a very clean eater. I guess he's kind of like the perfect example of somebody, or like what a nutritionist would want as a client, because he really eats very correctly. You know, he's very disciplined in that aspect. And it speaks about him as well, just Obatala being disciplined and his children and his priests being very disciplined and diligent, because if we put the wrong thing on this Orisha or we give it the wrong offering, the results and the repercussions could really be dire. Because Obatala really doesn't interact with a couple different things, right? And, you know, it goes back to the Odu of Eyobe as well, because a lot of Obatala's taboos were born there. And ultimately, being that Obatala is associated so much with the white cloth, it also explains why a lot of Obatala's taboos are associated with the same taboos within the Iyawo year, right? Or the year in white. So you're going to notice that there's a lot of similarities there, because basically, apart from the Orisha Alabatori that the person has crowned, Obatala is radiating the person pretty heavily. So Obatala wants them to kind of fall in line with what he wants as well, so that he's in harmony, or the person is in harmony, or the Yawo is in harmony with not only their guardian Orisha, but with Obatala, because he has so much to do with that priesthood and that ceremony of Orisha, right? So one of the very key taboos that Obatala has is red palm oil, right? There's various viewpoints on this. I would say 99.9% of the time, red palm oil is an absolute taboo for Obatala. But there are Odu that speak of where you can offer red palm oil to Obatala. I would only recommend this for people who have this Odu, right? Not going to share the Odu right now, but there is one Odu, at least to my knowledge, where Obatala consumed red palm oil and things went wonderfully, right? But I would only recommend that for the person who has this Odu and Hand of Ifa, right? Because the Odu of Hand of Ifa is going to really explain to us how we should interact with our Orishas. When we're talking about the Ita of Orisha, it's not necessarily to tell us how to interact with our Orishas as much as what the Orishas want from us or are telling us to do as far as advice goes. Orumila is the one who kind of tells us how to interact with our deities and which deities are beneficial for us, which deities we should receive, and that concept is in the Odu of Otura Irete, right? But red palm oil, for the most part, 99.9% of the time, keep it away from Obatala. Try not to have it next to him. He doesn't want to smell it. Make sure you wash your hands, all that kind of stuff. Is it taboo for an Omo Obatala to urge palm oil for the other Orisha? No, because remember that we are not the Orishas, right? You are not necessarily Obatala. And when we're talking about touching it, I mean, there's very few things I can see of people having an ewo for touching, right? I mean, more consumption, right? Like you're going to hear the children of Oya shouldn't consume ram, things like that. Or the children of Obatala really shouldn't consume emu, which is palm wine. That's all interpretive, right? But as far as you placing red palm oil, like let's say you're a child of Obatala and you're placing red palm oil on eshu, that's not a taboo. That we can't really stop that, because there's certain things in place in Ifa where things are kind of already set in motion. I would say it's more dangerous to not put red palm oil on eshu. Like I would rather deal with Obatala's punishment for touching red palm oil than me receiving punishment for not putting red palm oil on eshu. So it's kind of like the lesser of two evils. But up until this point, as far as actually coming in physical contact with it, the children of Obatala have no issues placing red palm oil on the other deities. Yeah, you gotta be careful. So that's one of them. And we're gonna get into that now. I get ahead of myself. Another pretty big taboo for Obatala is salt. It's also known as iyo, right? Another very big taboo for Obatala, and there's actually a story that really explains why these two things specifically are probably two of the most important taboos that Obatala has. And that story is once again in the Odu of Eyobe, right? What ended up happening is when we're talking about Eyobe, we're talking about when Obatala, Osagninyan, was married to his wife Yemu, right? And they had a child, and that child, his name was Eyobe, or Ejimobe, which means double salvation, where two people were saved, right? And what ended up happening is these people were having serious marital problems around the time that their child was born. And they basically got to the point where, they were trying to kill each other, right? And what happened is Yemu really didn't feel, or Ochanla, I believe the name they specifically use in the Pataki is Ochanla, forgive me. Ochanla did not feel like Obatala was really fulfilling his roles, right? As far as a father, providing food, all of these different necessities. And she got really tired of it, right? Obatala, on the other hand, felt like his wife was really persisting and asking way too much of him, right? Or she just wasn't being considerate because he would work, he would do all these different things. So they were just having, a battle of the sexes, a battle of, parents, man and woman, right? Going through the stressful and beautiful time of having a child. So as of right now, I can't really remember who threw the first punch, but I believe it was the wife. The wife got to the point where she was like, I'm going to kill this guy. So what she ended up doing is she put red palm oil in his food, right? Knowing that was a taboo, right? And when he was about to consume it, his son, Eyobe, basically looked at him and said, Dad, don't eat that. Mom just put this in your food. And he said, oh, really? So she's trying to kill me. All right, I got her. She's going to get hers, right? So what ended up happening is he would prepare her food, and what he ended up doing was throwing salt in it. And when the mother was about to eat it, the child was like, Mom, don't eat that. Dad put salt in it, right? So, basically the young boy saved both of his parents' life, but it even brought forth a more serious situation where each of them were accusing each other of basically trying to assassinate each other. And they were like, well, do you have any witnesses? And we were like, the baby. Now, mind you, Eyobe was a baby when this all happened, but miraculously he was able to talk and walk, or, it says in this Odu that the person's going to be able to develop quite quickly. So what ended up happening is they brought the baby as a witness. The judge asked the baby, once again, the judicial theme with Obatala. The judge asked the baby, what did you see? He said, I saw my mom try to kill my dad. I saw my dad try to kill my mom with the red palm oil and the salt. And ultimately, they had to make peace because that's what the baby wanted. The baby said, I didn't tell on them because I wanted each of them to hate each other, or for chisme, or for gossip. I didn't want to lose either of my parents, and I wanted them to kind of get over it and be adults and figure out whether they're going to stay together or just co-parent me and, get a divorce. And, everyone was so taken aback by the child of Obatala's wisdom after only being, alive for 9 days. And his ability, the parents came to the conclusion it's best for us to separate and just co-parent this amazing boy that we've given birth to. So one of the Odus that really speaks of the taboo of red palm oil and salt for Obatala is going to be Eyobe, right? You're going to hear that a lot. That sign, Obatala, is very predominant there. He went through a lot of rough things there. But, it speaks of his life cycle. Yeah, so those are two of them, right? We touched on the sunlight and the candles. Obatala, the sun was a big reason and the light was a big reason of his failure, right? The sun overheated him, caused him to kind of become weak. And because of it, he consumed palm oil or fell into one of his vices. So since that day, when all that kind of happened in the creation myth, he's like, I'm not going to really interact with sunlight too much because it really debilitates me. And if you notice, in the Odu of Eyobe, it says, be very careful with receiving too much sunlight because it can debilitate you, especially if it hits your head. Me personally, I think this is an interpretation from the story when Obatala was working under the sun and the sun was hitting his head so hard that he became dizzy and needed a refresher so he wouldn't pass out, which ultimately caused him to drink the palm oil that ultimately caused him to make the mistakes when it came to molding the human race. So this is why there are even some people and some priests that I know, they don't even put candles to Obatala. They don't like him in the light at all. There's even some people I know that, they have a white cloth on Obatala at all times because they just believe so heavily in the concept of him not coming in contact with sunlight. So it can be a taboo depending on where you basically, where your religious house comes from. And, what you believe in and what you practice. As you can see, my Obatala is up top. I don't have a cloth on him. My wife's does. He's never outside anyway. He's kind of always back here. So, you know, he doesn't have too many opportunities to come in contact with light. I think ultimately the candle thing, at least in my opinion, might be a bit much, because the candle, or the itana, is a really important part of our religious process. So I don't know if it goes as far to like be like, you know, no candles to Obatala, but I will say that the Orisha should not be under open sunlight anyway. There's very few ones that could be outside like that. So usually he's not going to be outside in the sun unless it's very, 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 very specific circumstances. So, you know, probably not something you have to worry about, but something just to have present, right? I've also heard of the anamu herb being taboo for Obatala as well as Yemaya. I've heard various interpretations of that. Just thought it would be an interesting piece of knowledge to share, so you can come to your own conclusions on that. Anamu is usually recognizable because it has a very strong smell, right? Some people even find it offensive, right? I have spoken to some old Olaos and some old Obatala priests that they're like, we don't put anamu in our Obatala. So, you know, just piece of information, and everybody can come to their own conclusions on there, right? Black animals. Obatala likes white animals. He likes to interact with everything that is white, period, right? He has to do with everything that is white, period. So when we're talking about the black animals, I mean, at the end of the day, let's say we have an Orisha ceremony or a crowning's coming up, and these are the animals that we have, and we need to get this process done. It's understood that it's not ideal, but it's necessary. There is a way to give them, though. And, you know, if you're not familiar with this way, you want to get with your religious elders and really learn how to do this, and it shouldn't be used frequently, but there is a way to give black animals to Obatala without having the repercussions that could come from him not being a fan of it. And when Obatala really stopped liking, you know, when he really stopped liking black animals was in various Odu Abifa, but one of the Odu Abifa that speaks of this is Ofun Obe, or Ofun Nabe, or Ofun Nara, where Obatala kind of cursed the black animals, and he said, I only want to deal with you know, with white animals, right? There's also another Odu known as Osabara, where Obatala kind of cursed, he didn't curse it, he just said, you know, I don't want to really eat, you know, the black sheep anymore, the black goat anymore. So, you know, various Odu where he kind of went, you know, away from that. I guess it kind of falls into his purification process as well, where he's like, everything with me has to be pure. And the reason being for that as well is Obatala was a very influential Orisha. It was easy to influence him, not because he was weak-minded, he had to develop that strength, but from another aspect, he just didn't want to pick up any negative spiritual vibrations from anything other than what was best for him. And his destiny was best to be aligned with that which was white, whether it be the cloth, the food, anything like that. So, you know, we can't overstate the importance of white things, right, with this Orisha. But there is a way to give black animals. Get with your religious elders so that, you know, you're definitely prepared if you're going to embark on that. And there's even Odu where black animals are given to Obatala per necessity, right? So what are Obatala's preferred offerings? What is he actually like, now that we've gone over what we want to kind of avoid giving him, right? Snails. He really loves snails. One of his favorite, you know, offerings, one of the favorite things he likes to eat. He's so associated with this animal, it's crazy. To the point where his children, initiates of Obatala, sometime will have the name snail, right? You know, and in Cuba you'll hear the word ewing, but in real, you know, pure Yoruba, it's igbing, right? So you'll hear names like igbing tonade, igbing leti, Igbing, etc. Right? I even have a, you know, a friend. His name is Ifa Igbing B, which means in Ifa the snail was born. You know, very associated with this animal. Loves it. Definitely one of the best things you can give to Obatala. At least within the Afro-Cuban practice, one of the Odu that speak of this offering is Ategbe or Ireten Telu, where it speaks of that. And there's actually a pataki that goes with that as well that explains it. But definitely an animal that really encompasses Obatala because, you know, usually they're white in color, very chalky. You know, they are very slow. They're very calm. They're very pacific. Like they're pacifists. Like they don't, you know, want conflict. They don't want any of these things. And they're always looking around. They're always very observant. And Obatala is always watching people or trying to see whether they're living the character that should be, right? And if we're talking about the pataki, that really speaks about where the snails were first offered to Obatala, it is within Iretentelu. And, what happened is Obatala had a liquor cabinet, right? And the snail was his butler. And what ended up happening was, yes, they do. They have a clear body fluid, And I'll even go even further than that, Heather. There's a path of Obatala known as Obamoro, right? Not to digress, I'm going to go back to the Pataki now. Obamoro is an Obatala that is mostly white beads with accents of purple beads, right? And he's seen as the king. He's seen as somebody that's very elegant, magnanimous. He's viewed as royalty. He's associated with that. And it's white with purple beads. I actually, in college, and this is why you have to really pay attention to everything, because all of it kind of goes back to Orisha, being that it's such an old culture. And I believe in like the Mediterranean, if that really where it was, there was a specific snail that existed that when you would, pound it or, kill it and the blood would drain, it was purple, right? And what would happen is that the kings, being that purple was seen as a very royal color, would use that dye to create those cloths for them, right? So it's really interesting that Obatala Obamoro is associated with the color purple and is associated with kingship and all these different things. And the way that he would have been able to wear purple back, thousands of years ago was basically through harvesting the snail associated with Obatala again and using it to dye his clothes. So this is why within Orisha culture, you have to really pay attention to everything, and it kind of finds its way back to Orisha culture, being that it is so old. So they do have a clear body fluid, but there is even a snail that bleeds purple that, would create the royal cloths for ancient kings. And Obamoro, being associated with purple, the color that came from that snail, would wear it as well. So it's really beautiful stuff when you see those correlations. But what ended up happening in Iretentelu was basically Obatala had a servant who was the snail, or Ibing, right? And what ended up happening was he was of his utmost confidence. So what ended up happening is Obatala trusted him and would leave, and Ibing had basically access to everywhere within his home, but he didn't know Ibing had a drinking problem. Once again, common thread with Obatala and stories that have to do with him, the drinking problem, right? And it's a lesson that Obatala teaches us, everything in moderation. Be careful with anything that intoxicates you or causes you to act irrationally, which is the nature of these things, such as Oti and Emu. And what ended up happening is the snail would drink Obatala's, liquor, right? And Obatala would come home and he'd be like, man, somebody's stealing from me. My bottles are missing. The Bacardi's low, the old Par is low, my Chivas is low. His whole liquor connection, my Hennessy is low. His whole liquor connection was low. So he went for divination with Ifa, and Ifa told him he needed to provide sacrifice to Shango, and Shango was going to assist him with his problem. And when he did this, Shango said, who lives with you? And he said, the only one that lives with me is the snail. Well, he was like, how about this? Why don't we spy on the snail and follow his trail? Because when a snail, obviously, when it transports itself, it leaves like this white, gooey, body fluid trail. So Obatala noticed that the snail didn't always have this condition. Like, he used to walk around or transport himself around, and he wouldn't leave this trail. So Obatala was like, yeah, sure, let's follow it. And when they did, they basically came to a place or a tree where there was a hole in it. And when they looked inside, it was the snail drinking Obatala's liquor. He was basically super, super inebriated. And Obatala looked at him and he said, why are you doing this? And the snail was so embarrassed and so shocked and so ashamed. And, Obatala sacrificed him for stealing from him. And even till this day, Obatala consumes snails. And it's a very popular item to sacrifice within Ifa. It's funny because the snail's trail was born in Iretentelu. And the reason he ended up developing a trail was because he would drink so much that the alcohol would come out of his pores, right? And it really is, an explanation of why the snail is the way it is. It conducts himself as somebody who's super inebriated, right? It moves slow. It, unfortunately, it secretes all of this liquid out of itself, and the human body does this as well. It tries to push out the alcohol to be able to function. All of these things. So really interesting story there in Iretentelu that speaks of the relationship between Obatala and the snail and his affinity for it, because the snail was his son, right? Efun is another material that's heavily associated with Obatala, also known as kakaria, or the white chalky substance that is used within Ifan Orisha practice. You're going to see, that it is in the traditional form much more of a calcified rock. And I've even heard of people saying that, within Yoruba cultures, it's consumed for people who have calcium deficiencies and things like that. Salt will kill a snail as well. It's one of the spirit animals of Obatala, definitely. Salt kills snails. Salt kills Obatala. So very, very good connection there. But Efung is also a very popular item there, and it's seen as something that really calms things. It's also seen as a purifier, right? Like calcium or lye, or I believe it's lime, where if you place it on top of a decomposing animal, it doesn't allow the infections and things to kind of rise up, right? And Ifa speaks of this as well, right? Where the efun, or the calcified rock, was actually utilized in an odu known as obeyono, to keep the epidemic from rising from the ground. Because what would happen in obeyono was that, they wouldn't bury animals. So being that they wouldn't bury animals, obviously this caused epidemic and sickness and all of these things. So divination was done, and Obatala provided the efun, or the kakaria, or what have you, and covered the animals with it, so that, the infection would not rise, right? And they would be able to cleanse the land. And if you look at farms, when you go and, when you're in Ifa and Orisha, you're constantly, at the farm, you notice that they put a white substance on the ground so that, infection and thing does not breed. It speaks of that, and it really correlates back to that Odu. And even within certain ceremonies, being that this is viewed by the public, so no sacrilege, kakaria or efun is placed on the body of the animals that have been sacrificed as a commemoration of what occurred at that moment, so that we don't relive that basically stage in human history where, we wouldn't bury animals and we would allow the infection to kind of get out of control. The efun is placed on them to kind of reiterate that. And all of that kind of goes back to the Odu Obeyono, right? So, Ori is another thing that's very associated with him, or shea butter. Within Creole practice, it's cocoa butter. The word Ori, I actually I have a video coming out about it, explaining the different aspects of it. But being that he's associated with Ori, the material, it also associates him with Ori as the head, him being the owner of heads, the constructor of heads, and his manifestation of Ijala or Ajala, right? Which also is spoken about in the Odu of Obeyono, right? So, it's one thing that he prefers quite a bit. It has a calming property. If you notice, all of the materials we're putting on Obatala is to calm him, right? Because he's somebody that gets agitated very quickly, and we don't want that, because Obatala in an agitated state can be very destructive, right? So that's another material. White animals we spoke about, and some of the Odus that explain it. Usually feminine animals. Not necessarily sure why, but he does necessarily have that thread where the base animals given to Obatala are usually feminine, maybe due to the feminine energy being very calm, being very pacifist in nature, not being destructive. It could also be a correlation to his war with the Iamio Shoronga as well, him having to destroy those feminine deities to be able to survive, being that they wanted to, annihilate him, right, for breaking certain taboos in that Odu. That could be a big explanation as to why he prefers feminine animals, right? And usually they're animals with Obatala that have gone through, their process of growth, right, or maturity. even though it can be either way. So, but as far as what it is, it's usually feminine animals, right? He prefers certain fruits, usually those that are grainy or sandy in nature, kind of like soursop or guanábana, right? Pears, white grapes, usually white anything with Obatala. Anything that's white is great. He's a big fan of milk. Milk, whether it be goats or cows. He prefers those things due to it being white in nature once again. He really likes desserts. I mean, if we look at sugar, it's white, at least in its refined aspect, right? So he's associated with that as well. And some of the desserts, at least in Cuba, that are really popular are arroz con leche, tres leche, tembleque, merengue, and dulce de coco, which are all very white in nature, right? And I'm just getting hungry thinking about it because I would really love arroz con leche right now. So some of the things that are associated with Obatala, and you're going to notice that it's usually predominantly desserts or things that are given to him, especially within the Afro-Cuban practice. I have seen ham offered to Obatala, especially with the bone in. So that's something else I've seen over the years. And a variety of, white edible things. Another thing within the traditional practice that's usually given to Obatala is the white obi, or the white cola, right? Nut. The white obi abada. And usually those are separated for Obatala because they're usually a very, radiant pink in nature, right? So usually the white ones are given to Obatala. And of course the coconut, right? Due to its white interior. Obi, Abon, was actually seen as the son of Obatala because Obatala dressed him in white cloth originally. It wasn't until Obi became vain that Olodumare and Obatala cursed him to say, now you'll be covered in brown. And for people to see the beautiful person that you are, they're going to have to open you up, right? And see that you are a good person, but unfortunately you've chosen to, basically dirty your reputation and yourself with your vanity, right? And there's a message there too. Sometimes we have to look within people to really see that they aren't what their exterior would make you think they are, right? So definitely. The white dove also, if we're talking about animals, the white dove is one of his preferred animal sacrifices. It's also a symbol of peace throughout multiple cultures, and Ifa is no different. It also touches on Obatala being a representation of peace, being a representation of progress, right? That war is not necessary. Or it even goes back to Obatala's manifestation of Ayaguna, because for there to be peace, Ifa says war and utter domination must occur, right? You can't have peace between, unfortunately, two parties that think they could win. So that Obatala was the one who kind of explained that concept here. So ultimately, he was the one who brought war to earth, and ultimately he was the one who brought peace. Unfortunately, he had to kind of carry those both in hand, a dove in one and a sword in another. So it talks about him bringing war and bringing peace at the same time. And that being why that animal is one of his preferred, because it kind of represents one of his key concepts, right? And that's why he prefers it. When we're talking about the color white, he's associated with it along with a bunch of its variations as far as being intercorrelated with other colors, and these represent his different paths, right? And we have gotten requests to go into the different paths of Orishas, and we're definitely going to get to that. But some of the popular ones, you're going to see Osagniñan or Osagnion, depending on how you want to pronounce it, is going to be white with like coral beads, like every 8 or every 16. Obatala Agemo, or Agema, or Alagema, or Alagemo, with any of its various names, is usually white and green. Obamoro, we touched on, is white and purple. Ayaguna is white and red. And it's interesting because it's very similar to Shango's Ileke, and there's a reason for that, being that those two gentlemen had a lot of interaction and a very strong relationship, right? And Oshanla, from what I've seen, is going to be white and clear beads. So you're going to see the variations. If you ever see somebody with a collar on that's mostly white with a hint of another color, it's because maybe that ileke or collar or necklace is representing their specific manifestation of Obatala that they've reincarnated in this life. He's associated with the color 8. Some people will go as far to say Obatala has 8 male paths, 8 female paths. I do believe there are more. I mean, within my study, I've seen some that really aren't on any list. I think it's more symbolic than anything of the color 8. It's, linked to the Odu of Eyobe, the infinity concept, the fact that it can continue. And also him being associated with the Odu within the Dilogun of Eyeunle, which is the number 8, and was one of the disciples of Eyobe who actually taught him how to speak. So you're going to see him associated with the number 8 and the various multiples of that number, right? We touched on that he has both male and female incarnations or paths. And it really touches on, once again, going back to the reason he has this duality is because he kind of had to populate the earth on his own, He had to kind of, detach from himself, I guess in like an Adam or Eve concept where he had to create a woman out of himself to be able to carry on the biological process of having kids, right? We touched on some of the paths, definitely did. We're going to be making a path series. Alrighty then, let's get into some of the relationships, and this is going to be where we're going to end the video eventually on. We're going to touch on some key relationships between Obatala and some of the other deities, right? And I would say the one we're going to touch on first is actually Obatala and Oduduwa. When you hear about these two deities, a lot of people don't know where to begin. Some people think they're the same guy in different aspects. Some people think they were the best of friends. Some people think they were married because some people interpret Odua as a female and Obatala as the male, or vice versa, or that Odua is a feminine path of Obatala. Really can't get into too much speculation about all of that. But I mean, what I've experienced and what I've seen, from a repetitive standpoint, is that these guys were enemies. Unfortunately, Obatala had a lot of enemies. I mean, I guess when you're king and when you're elected and when you're Olodumari's preferred, you're going to have a lot of enemies. And with the decisions he made, I think he made even more enemies than he needed to. But these guys did not necessarily get along. And the reason was because they were both competing to see who was going to be Olofin Aye, or who was going to be basically the governor of Earth, right? And a lot of people say Obatala lost that war. And this is why Oduduwa is seen as Olofin Aye, or the governor of Earth, because he fulfilled Obatala's role of creating humankind, right? When Obatala unfortunately became inebriated and was not able to. So there was always that friction there, right? And so technically they're enemies. But there is a story, and it's actually in my Odu of Irete Odura, or Irete Suka, that really delves into what happened after that situation, right? And what happened is after, after he lost his chance of becoming Olofin Aye, or when that process was still going on, because maybe Obatala didn't give it up that easily, even though, he was unfortunately punished for his actions, they went to war. And, when they went to war, they were noticing that neither of them were hurting each other, but who was hurting each other were their children, right? Obatala's disciples went to war with Oduduwa's disciples. And, it kind of got to the point where they decided to have a sit down and really speak about everything. And, they spoke and they said, we're losing a lot of followers. We're losing a lot of children. We aren't making any headway as far as who's going to be king or whether you're going to take my crown, which is what Oduduwa said. So what are we going to do? Well, Obatala said, I'm never going to forgive you, and I really don't want much interactions with you. I mean, me and you really don't have much to speak about. And Oduduwa was like, that's fine. I mean, we really don't have much to speak about. So how are we going to coexist? Because if not, we're going to destroy the earth. And they kind of came to terms and said, me and you, or we, don't have much interaction, but, our children don't have to suffer for that. And they should be able to experience the positive aspects of you as well as me. So we won't make each other a taboo for our children, right? But even though we won't interact, what we'll do is we'll take care of each other's children, being on the amount of pain that we've caused in our own situations. And, what ended up happening is from my Odu is where the concept of the children of Oduduwa who decide to remain as Olorisha priests or decide to crown Orisha actually crown Obatala or Chanla, right? Iret de Sukkah says that within the Afro-Cuban tradition, the child of Odudua automatically, his mother is Oshanla, right? Due to this pact that was made in Iret de Sukkah. And this is the Obatala that he crowns, and once it's crowned, obviously you don't ask for a father Orisha because Odudua is his father, right? He just went through the rites of Oshanla to be able to fulfill that role and that need. Unfortunately, in Cuba, the initiation rites of Odudua didn't make it over. I know they exist in Nigeria. So I remember, I hear this topic all the time of, what do we do? What's this? What's that? If you want to go based off the pure Creole Afro-Cuban format, this is what is stipulated within the Afro-Cuban Ifa. Within Iret de Sukkah, there's also known as a path of Odudua, which most people actually, it's not a path of Odudua, but it's a character within Ifa, and her name was Iyaremu, which means Iya Aremu, mother Iya Aremu, of the prince, right? A lot of people don't know that Aremu means prince, right? Or prince to be. So it speaks of the mother and the feminine aspect that has to do with the children of Odudua. Some people would even go as far to say, that's the mother of the children of Odudua, and there's no reason to crown Oshanla. I really can't give a definite basis on this. If you were to ask me what I would do if someone came to me and was like, hey, let's say it's a young man, he's a child of Odudua, and he wants to crown Orisha and ultimately do Ifa. I'd be like, that's fine, Mehado. These are the options that we have here. Or you can get in contact, or we can get in contact with some of our Nigerian brothers, and we could find out how the initiation process is with the children of Odudua and what the stipulations are there, and then we'll do Ifa to you the Afro-Cuban way. It's depending on the goals of the person. Just know there's options there, and at least within the Afro-Cuban Ifa, it is touched upon. And that was the pact that was made in Iret de Sukkah. Right? When we talk about the relationship between Odudua and Obatala as well, they don't necessarily get along, but they coexist, right? And it's really seen within the aspect of procreation, especially from a male standpoint. Because an Odu known as Oshetura, right? Or Oshea Aureola, speaks of the sperm, right? And I believe it's Ato in Yoruba. And in Oshetura, it was identified that Obatala represents the actual, sperm, or Obatala, if we look at biology and we look at sperm, the viscous liquid that composes it isn't necessarily the sperm. It's what helps the sperm transport itself, to be able to create a child or, fertilize an egg. Now, it says that liquid is Obatala, the white aspect of it. And then the spirituality of the actual little sperm cells that are in it is the spirit of Odudua. And they coexist to be able to make this happen. And it kind of goes back to their situation where Obatala started the job and Odudua finished it, because the liquid aspect of the sperm helps you get there. And then the actual sperm is the one who penetrates the egg to make life possible. So when we look at Patakia Vifa, it just simply explains history, and vice versa explains nature. And that's when the really beautiful correlations come in, because 5,000 years ago, the Yoruba and the Awalawo, they knew all of these things. And some people would be like, how did they know? Well, you could say they were there for the beginning. This is why things are the way they are. So it speaks once again of their relationship and how they're able to coexist peacefully to be able to make things happen. It also speaks about, back to Iret de Sukkah, where they made a pact to work together and protect each other's children. It kind of transports itself to Ochetura, and we look at the concept of the sperm, the liquid and actual sperm cell aspect. They're working together for their children. Which child? The one that's about to be conceived and actually, fertilized, right? So it's really incredible stuff. And I love when you get to a point and you study enough Ifa, when you can start looking at different Pataki and different Odu and being like, wow, these two concepts really correlate. And I think that's a big thing here with Ifa, is that most practitioners are trying to just look at the paper and reread what has already been written from 100 years ago. And thank God for Pedro Arango, thank God for all the old Cuban Babalaos and all the old Nigerian ones that were able to make interpretations and leave us with a very, very incredible corpus. But there's still a lot of Ifa to be interpreted. There's still a lot of, new correlations and interpretations to be made so we can understand ourselves better. So that's one of my favorite parts when it comes to studying, right? Obatala and Shango, right? Very, 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 hi Cindy, thank you so much for watching. Welcome to Joseph Baba Ifa's live video about Obatala. And for everybody else joining us right now, that is the topic of the video today. Thank you so much. Obatala and Shango. Definitely two Orishas that are very, very, connected to each other. On various manifestation of Obatala, right? When we're talking about Obatala or Sagdinyang, we're talking about the father of Shango, right? And when we're talking about Oshanla or Yemu, once again, interchangeable, we're speaking about the birth mother of Shango. So he's very, very linked to Obatala. And when we're talking about Obatala Jaguna, we're speaking about the older brother of Shango. And each of them played a different role in his life, right? Obatala Osagdinyang, unfortunately, was not technically Obatala's biological father. He was actually his adoptive father, being that, unfortunately, Obatala's wife, I believe it was Yemu, had an affair with Agayu, who was the boatsman at the river, right? Being that she didn't have the funds to be able to transport herself from one side to the other. Due to trying to avoid disgrace, basically Yemu basically made Obatala believe that, it was his child, and Osagdinyang raised him. Yemu always knew that, there was more than likely the child of Agayu. And it gets into the great epic of when Shango unfortunately suffered embarrassment because apparently somehow or another this information got out. And, they basically ridiculed him over it when he went and searched for Agayu, and it was ultimately confirmed that Agayu was his biological father due to the natural abilities he had with fire and being able to resist heat and being able to interact with Agayu on that level. But Shango always recognized Obatala as the father that raised him and loved him and really taught him things. It's spoken of in various Odu where Obatala was able to calm Shango's tumultuous nature, right? He was very aggressive. He was a little frustrated due to, his parental situation. And Obatala always loved him as if it was his own son. And at one point, Shango, his ileke, was completely made of red beads. And Obatala recognized that if he would have left him in this state, he would have basically become very destructive. So he incorporated one of his white beads into that necklace, which ultimately brought the balance between Agayu's influence on Shango, which was the red and the fire and all of this passion, and then the white influence of Obatala, which was the calm, the wisdom, and the ethical and integrity and logical aspect of who he was. And that's why you look at Shango, and he really encompasses the best of both worlds with these two guys who were his paternal influences. But Obatala was really the one who saved Shango from, self-destruction. And apart from that, crowned Shango. Shango being his heir apparent, and ultimately giving his crown to Shango to be able to run his kingdom, being that he had fulfilled his filial roles or his son roles with Obatala so well. So it speaks heavily of that. When we're talking about, obviously, now we're going to get into Ayaguna, which is a kind of different manifestation, because Ayaguna is seen as the Obatala who actually brought war to earth, right? And the reason being was because, there were conflicts going on earth that weren't ending, and ultimately it was seen as a method where Ayaguna presented the idea to Olodumare, if you allow me to, I can end these issues, but it's going to come with a lot of violence and pain. And Olodumare said, do what you wish. And Ayaguna basically was able to go, introduce weapons, some people even say the gun, into the world. And what ended up happening was, the war ended, or the conflicts ended, and they were able to rebuild after that. Difficult role to fulfill, but one that's necessary, right? For there to be peace. So how did Ayaguna influence Shango? Ayaguna was actually the one who taught Shango how to fight, taught Shango how to defend himself, taught Shango the arts of war. Till this day, he's super associated with it. And Obatala Ayaguna was the one who taught his younger brother, Shango, how to be able to maneuver within these situations. So Definitely a big influence and interaction between both of those Orishas. They're identified within Ifa as the two crowns, right? And usually that's reflected in the Odu Obebara or Obara Obe, the 6886, because Obara is heavily associated with Shango as well. So you're going to hear that they're two deities that shared crowns, because Obatala actually gave his crown to Shango to be able to continue with himself, right? So it speaks of that. And the one we're going to go ahead and end on is his relationship with Orumila, right? Because Obatala does have a lot to do with Ifa and Orumila. And if you look at our video of Ochanla, it also speaks of her role within Ifa and with the king and all of the development of Ifa and a lot of the concepts there. But Obatala and Orula, unfortunately, Obatala was a victim of infidelity on more than one occasion. One occasion, it was his wife with Agayu, and unfortunately, with another occasion, Acheetanya. Another occasion was where, unfortunately, Ogun took advantage of his mother, right under Obatala's nose. So when this issue actually occurred, obviously Ogun cursed himself. But Obatala said, any child that's born of my wife from this point forward, I'm going to execute, because I really can't deal with the pain I've just suffered, right? So ironically, the next child that was conceived was Orumila, right? And, it's very Greek mythology, kind of similar, because, Kronos, who was Zeus's father, wanted to eliminate all of his children because there was a prophecy that his child was going to come to dethrone him. So, it's very similar in that aspect, even though Obatala wasn't necessarily worried about Orumila dethroning him, even though he ultimately did, because Orumila ended up becoming even above Obatala within the religion as far as being the Messiah and being, the prophet that would basically take Ifa into the future, right? So what happened was Yemu had to give birth in secret, and who delivered the baby was actually Elegua, right? And Elegua went running with the child into the forest and basically buried him at the foot, I believe it was of a ceiba tree, I believe. And basically what he would do is he would feed his brother and take care of his brother. Shango would also go and do this, recognizing that there was something special about him, right? And what ended up happening was basically Orumila grew until, it kind of came to a point where he's like, yo, I can't live here no more. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm getting too big for this hole, right? And what ended up happening is, Shango and Elegua orchestrated a grand reunion between Orumila and his father Obatala. And there's even versions where Obatala became sick, and Orumila was able to cure him, right? Divination was said that, the cause of the illness was either the separation of a lost child spiritually draining Obatala, or at this point, Orumila had kind of learned how to manipulate Ifa to a point where he was able to perform at Bo and create certain akoshe or medicines for Obatala to cure him and make him feel better. Ultimately, Obatala lifted the curse after he realized, that this son that had come was going to be a positive influence on the world. And, he even forgave Ogun after this. So, it was kind of like this big family reunion, and they were all able to move on to where even Ogun didn't have to continue with his auto punishment of having to work 24 hours on end. So once, Orumila basically did this, he had a position, but it wasn't super pronounced. Obatala was like, you're my son, you have all the privileges of my other children, but, you kind of just do your own thing over there, and because he was the youngest, technically. Orumila is actually the youngest of Obatala's children, which once again is reiterated in Ayobe, right? The small will become the large, the last will become first. So what ended up happening was Obatala actually was the owner of the Olokun shells, right? Or the one who kind of manipulated them or knew how to manipulate them, right? And he was the one who would kind of handle this. And this Odu, this Pataki is actually present in the Odu of Osarosum. And it's a pretty controversial one because a lot of people don't necessarily agree with it. Here at Joseph Baba Ifa, we're not trying to sway one way or the other. We're just trying to provide the information as ethically and correct as possible. And Obatala would manipulate the shells, and he would be the one to kind of pull out people's guardian Orisha to see which priesthood they would be initiated in, right? So it was ironic because every time Obatala would throw the shells, people would come out a child of Obatala. And, it got to the point where Obatala was very wealthy. He had the most initiates. He was always being fed. All of these things. And the other Orishas kind of looked and were like, yo, we're going to die of hunger because no one comes out a child of us. Or how is our priesthood going to survive? We're going to die. And Shango was the first one to really, kind of get angry at this. Because Shango is one of the few Orishas who was never afraid of Obatala. He would always speak to Obatala openly because of their relationship. Obatala really couldn't pull the, I'm the big Orisha card on Shango because Shango was his son and would do everything for him. So Shango went to Obatala and said, Papa, I don't know what's going on, but every time you pull out a guardian angel, it comes out Obatala. You're the one doing all the Orisha ceremonies. You're the one eating, getting fed, and we're all dying of hunger here. We're basically at your whim. And Obatala said, how dare you question me? How dare you bring my practice under observation and investigation? Because Obatala fully knew he was manipulating the shells so that the person would come out a child of Obatala, right? He was doing something very unethical, and Shango knew. So Shango said, all right, that's fine. Shango left and went straight to Olodumari's house. And he spoke to Olodumari and he said, Papa, this guy, my father, he's throwing the shells. Everybody's a child of Obatala. We're all dying here. What do we do? And Olodumare said, I really can't do anything because it's his. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I can't do much. Do you have any options? And Shango was like, well, can anybody else do this function? Because if not, you're just going to have Obatala and we're all going to disappear. And Olodumare said, well, is there any Orisha that does not get crowned? Right? Does anybody not get initiated in that sense to that Orisha? And Shango said the only one that doesn't get crowned like that is Orula. And Olodumare was like, who's Orula? And Shango said, that's my younger brother. And Olodumare said, well, bring him and we'll kind of look at what his credentials are and, we can kind of come to a conclusion. So when Orumila came, excuse me, he was a very humble guy. He had his instruments with him. He was a little nervous because he's about to go in front of God Almighty. And, his brother had come running to, get him to do this. And he was like, okay. So he's standing in front of Olodumare, and Olodumare looks at him and is like, man, this guy is like a pipsqueak, man. He's like, he's not really what we're looking for, But then he started asking Orumila questions, and he started realizing the wisdom that he had and the humility and the lack of, negativity and just how ethical he was. And he said, all right, what do you use to divine? And at this point, the opele really wasn't in confection like that. The one that he was using, it might have been, but the one he preferred to use was the iking, right? So he's like, I use these 16 seeds and I kind of ask questions to your energy through it. And Olodumare was like, I like that. I have good news and I have bad news. And Orumila was kind of like, okay. Olodumare said, the bad news is you're never going to be a crowned Orisha. No one is ever going to, crown you. You're never going to be that first Orisha that the person, consecrates into their priesthood, right? And Orula was like, damn, all right, well, that sucks, right? But, whatever you want, you're God. And then the other aspect, Olodumare said, hi, baby. Just here making a live video. And love you. And he said, Olodumare said, I have good news. And Orula was like, okay, what's that? He said, you're going to be the one to identify everybody's guardian Orisha. From this day forward, the only method that can be used and can be my direct word in identifying who the Orisha, the person should be crowned in, is with the seeds of Iking, which are the ones that will only be manipulated by you and your priests, your sons, the Babalaos, right? And Orula was like, all right, that's fine. Whatever you want, I'll do. So Olodumare called Obatala to the meeting, and Obatala was kind of shook because he's like, okay, my two kids are here, Olodumare's here, everybody's looking at me like there's something they know I don't. And Olodumare told him, he said, we've come, we basically, it's been brought to our attention that you've been doing unethical things with the Dilogun shells. You've been basically pulling people's guardian Orisha, and at that point, that wasn't an issue, but the problem is you're taking everybody for yourself. And Obatala said, no, there's no evidence of that, this, that, and the third. And he was like, all right, I'm not here to argue with you, but what's going to happen is you're not going to do that no more. who's going to pull out your guardian Orisha, or the guardian Orishas of the human race, is going to be Orula, your youngest son. And you're going to have to share the Dilogun secrets with everybody else, including Shango, Ochun, everybody else, so everybody else can make a living, right? And Obatala was not happy, right? But at the end of the day, you know, Olodumari's word was law, and in the Odu of Osarosum was where it was identified that the Babalaos are the ones who pull out the guardian Orisha of people through the sacred seeds of Iking, because unfortunately the Dilogun, being that it was originally owned by Obatala, has the influence and a predisposition to either the person come out a child of Obatala, or the person to come out a child of the diviner who's doing the divination with the Dilogun to pull out the guardian Orisha of the person. That's why, in my experience, I've noticed that when, you know, the Oriate or the Olorisha priest who's doing the divination to ask who the guardian Orisha is, it usually comes out a child of the same person performing the divination, right? And it's literally a reliving of what Osarosum really spoke of. Another thing, you know, within Ifa, in the Odu of Otura Irete, it says that it is through your sign of hand of Ifa where you really identify which Orishas you're meant to receive. Being that Orumila has no predisposition to who you're going to receive, because when you do your divination for hand of Ifa, you've already received Orula. So he doesn't care who you receive afterwards. So, you know, these two very key things were identified in Osarosum. Orumila identifies who's your guardian Orisha, as well as which Orishas you're supposed to receive throughout a lifetime, right? Not the Dilogun. Once again, this is what Ifa says. I'm not saying that anybody has to change their methods or whatever it may be, but once again, Joseph Baba Ifa, we just pull out the information and allow people to interpret it on their own. So that speaks of Obatala and Orula's relationship, as well as in our video of Ochanla, it speaks of that aspect of their relationship as well. You know, beautiful relationship. Also, Obatala and Orula also intermingle on a different level, because Obatala, believe it or not, was the original owner of the Ada Orisha, or the knife, which is actually this instrument right here, right? It's very similar to the Agogo, and to be quite sorry, there's a feather there. We've been working, forgive me. You know, this was actually replaced by the Agogo in Afro-Cuban culture. So the Ada Orisa is actually what is used to perform sacrifice. So in Nigeria, sometimes you'll see it'll have a very sharp blade at the end, or be, you know, filed down to a point where it is a blade, and, you know, sacrifices are performed on animals. But actually the original owner of this was Obatala, to be able to protect himself from the Iyami Oshoronga. And who confectioned it was Ogun. So technically Ogun is not the owner of the knife. He was the one who was used as a blacksmith to create it for his father, Obatala, who was the original owner. And ultimately, the Ada Orisa was given to Orumila not only to defend himself, but to defend Obatala from the Iyami Oshoronga. So actually Obatala was the one who gave Kwanadu, or Ipana Odu, Obeka Kwanadu, which is another Obeka Panadu, various forms depending on how you pronounce the K, to Orumila, his manifestation of Osagriñan, right? And this was the original. So the real bell, one of the preferred bells of Orumila to be called upon, is actually the Ada Orisa. We make a little noise there. And you're also going to see the Iroje, they're interchangeable. But the Agogo of Obatala is actually this, and it can also be used for Orumila as well, right? And it's actually a weapon. And its noise is supposed to do one of three things. Get rid of the Iyami Oshoronga, call them when you're doing an Ipeche, or basically, you know, invoke these different deities. So, or to actually, you know, take them away, right? So, once again, talking about the relationship between Obatala and Orula, right? So, Obatala is a very mystical Orisha. He has to do with the spirit world because he has so much to do with the decomposition process. He's the owner of the skeletal system. And the reason he has so much to do with the decomposition process is because, not to be too morbid, but unfortunately when someone begins to decompose, they turn white, right? And white like clay. And Obatala, being the one that confectioned the human race out of clay, It says that from clay we came, from clay we will return, and Obatala was the owner of that. That's why when you decompose, you begin to turn white, which is the color of Obatala, right? So he has a lot to do with the spirit world and all of its aspects because of that. He's actually the one who helps begin that process. So he's there when the sperm is first there, as well as the color of the egg, which is white, and then all the way at the end of life, he's also present because of you turning white, like the clay that he owns and the color that he's associated with. He's the father of the Orishas. He's referred to as Baba or Baba, but more, within Yoruba it's Baba. And it's a term of respect and a term of love. He is the father of all the Orishas. Anybody who's lucky enough to be referred to as this should be very appreciative because it is a sign of utmost respect within Yoruba culture. And this is our video on Obatala, really wonderful deity. Definitely one that I love very much. My Odo Vida de Suka was where Obatala adopted the person and said, treat my sons as your brothers because I will always treat you as my sons. So for me, Obatala is sacred. I'm constantly surrounded by his children. I get along very well with all of his children. And it's just a really beautiful deity. So we're really happy that we were able to come out with this video. Guys, thank you so much for all the support on the videos up until this point. New subscribers are coming every day. Thank you for the support of Botanica Candles and More, Joseph Baba Ifa YouTube channel, and to all my loved ones, to all my God kids, thank you so much. Just want to take a quick moment, as custom, just to say hello to my grandmother. Mama, we love you. Thank you for everything. And from Joseph Baba Ifa, Botanica Candles and More, please make sure to subscribe on the YouTube channel as well. Any further questions, comments, anything like that, you're more than welcome to reach out to us on there. So from Joseph Baba Ifa, Botanica Candles and More, and from Obatala, right? Hekwa Orisha, Hekwa Orisha, Epao. Thank you so much. And may God bless all of you. And you guys have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Make sure you take care of Elegua. If you're missing any of those things, we haven't met the Botanica, right? So from all of us here, all of us, right? You guys have a blessed day. Take care.